I want to bring in MS Now's Michael Schnell on Capitol Hill. David Drucker is senior writer at The Dispatch, an MS Now contributor and author of the book In Trump's Shadow. Lisa Rubin is MS Now's senior legal reporter. I think it's notable, Michael, that Lutnick is the first of Trump's cabinet members questioned in the Epstein investigation. What might we know about what's happening behind closed doors?
Yeah, Chris, it's incredibly notable, and some could say it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, day and conversation that the House Oversight Committee will be having as part of this long-running investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So in terms of this transcribed interview, it got underway at around 11:15 a.m. this morning. They are still inside in that room just behind me. The way that this thing works is that Howard Lutnick gives an opening statement, and then Republicans are given the opportunity to question him, and then Democrats are given the opportunity, and they go back and forth from there. Of course, as you mentioned, the questions center on what the relationship was between Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein and how long it lasted. There are questions about the timeline of their ties. Howard Lutnick said that after a 2005 encounter, he had cut off ties with Jeffrey Epstein, but then he had confirmed that 2012 visit to Epstein Island. And up to 2018, there are email correspondence between folks in Lutnick's circle and folks in Jeffrey Epstein's circle. And I can tell you, this is a day that lawmakers have been looking forward to for a very long time in terms of talking to Howard Lutnick. He's appeared at least 2 times before under oath for different hearings in his capacity as Commerce Secretary, and he had told lawmakers earlier that he would be answering their questions about Jeffrey Epstein come today. Take a listen to one of those previous exchanges.
Why did you lie about your relationship with Epstein?
The House Oversight Committee and I have agreed
we will
the appropriate time
reclaiming
together.
My time. I do not accept that answer. We've heard that one. We are our own committee. We have our own reason to test your credibility and veracity. Please answer the question. Why did you lie to the Post?
I have voluntarily agreed to spend the time and talk about it.
I reclaim the time. Let the record reflect you're dodging the question. The cover-up continues.
So, Chris, Howard Lutnick right there saying he would answer questions about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein today. Again, that is happening behind closed doors right now. I'm told by a source in that room behind me that Lutnick said it was unsettling when he had received an invitation to visit Epstein Island. But, of course, he then took his family there anyway. We're sure to glean through the details of that exchange once we get our hands on the transcript. One more note that I'll say about today's transcribed interview. There are only about 6 members of Congress who are present. It's because this is happening during a week when Congress is out of session, the House not holding votes. It's worth noting that there is some frustration among Democratic members that it's happening on a recess day. However, this transcribed interview was scheduled back in March when Congress was supposed to be in session this week. Then the House schedule changed because King Charles visited last week and they had to line up the schedule with the Senate. So some members in there, but certainly not the full committee, as they get this very key witness behind them to ask him about Jeffrey Epstein.
Michael, thank you for that. David, it's against that backdrop that I think it's important to play this series of examples of how Howard Lutnick's stories have shifted dramatically in just the past 4 months. Here it is.
So I was never in the room with him socially, for business, or even philanthropy. If that guy was there, I wasn't going because he's gross.
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies.
We all forget things, David, but I guess is the key question here whether members of Congress who actually are there find it plausible he could have forgotten bringing his entire family to a private island owned by someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who he did not have good things to say about over the years.
Yeah, and the nannies, plural. So that was an interesting little side note there. Look, it's very possible for anybody to forget a whole bunch of things. I mean, I can barely remember what I did last week, let alone a decade ago, who I met with, who I didn't meet with. I forget things all the time. The problem is when you're a high-profile, either elected official or public official, and there's a major investigation like this, people are going to be very skeptical of the idea that you forgot something. That's just the price you pay for being in public service. And, you know, I think as this investigation unfolds, and presumably as Mr. Lutnick went back through his calendars and went through everything, he may now that he's being deposed by the committee have a better idea exactly where he was, when he was, and who he was with. As a matter of politics, what I have found over the years are a couple of things, Chris. One, people have a much higher bar for the other political party than they do for their own. So there are going to be a lot of voters on one side here. They're going to be really skeptical of Mr. Lutnick, and probably a lot of voters on his side that are going to give him the benefit of the doubt. The other thing here is that, look, the president's running a war in Iran, and it's still a war, no matter what he says. Inflation is up. The economy is voters perceive it to be in difficult shape, and the president's party is under the gun as we approach the midterm elections. These are the sorts of distractions that you really don't want when you're dealing with such momentous issues. And this thing just doesn't go away, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
So, Lisa, as someone who has read many of the thousands of pages in the Epstein files and has stayed on top of this story from the very beginning, what are the key questions you would like to or would hope to see answered?
Well, look, the very most basic question that I have is the one that Madeleine Dean has, which is, why did you misrepresent to the Post the fact that you continued to have a relationship with this person? Because it's not just that 2012 island visit. There are emails between the two of them that persist through 2018. But here are my most fundamental questions. What else did you see when you either visited his home or interacted with him on the island? Who did you tell? Did you notify anyone that something seemed awry to you, or in his words, gross? And maybe most importantly of all, why did you continue to do business with him? And I think this is an overlooked part of the Howard Lutnick story. Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein were both investors in a company called Adfin. In 2018, in their last known email correspondence, Jeffrey Epstein is asking Howard Lutnick about how this shared investment of theirs is performing. Howard Lutnick, through a spokesperson at one point, said he had no idea that Jeffrey Epstein was also an investor. That email exchange, however, puts the lie to that. And so there's only so many times a person can forget, notwithstanding what David says about the fact that we are more forgiving sometimes of people who agree with us than we are of people who don't. There is a pattern here, and it doesn't just pertain to 2012. I want to know why Howard Lutnick continued, despite his statements to the Post, to have social, professional, and philanthropic ties with Jeffrey Epstein.
And maybe I've misread or misremembered, but the first encounter that they had, as I recall it, Lutnick and his wife were invited over by their next-door neighbor,
Correct.
Jeffrey Epstein, to see the place. He takes them into a room and is curious about why there is a massage room in the center of this, I think it's the largest private residence in New York, and he makes an off-color comment about the types of massages. That was their first significant encounter?
I believe that that's correct. And Howard Lutnick then goes on to tell the New York Post in that podcast interview that he and his wife together vow they are never going to be again in a room with Jeffrey Epstein. And yet, we know that while they maybe weren't in a self-contained room, they had lunch on the island outside and continued to have engagements or interactions with him, whether via email or, for example, Howard Lutnick invited Jeffrey Epstein to a 2015 fundraiser he held on behalf of then Secretary and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Those are the kinds of things that people are going to want to have explained. Why did you continue to reach out to this person? Why did you continue to have even a distant acquaintance-like relationship with him if you were so fundamentally, for lack of a better word, grossed out by what you saw at your next-door neighbor's home? Why didn't you completely disassociate from him? And why didn't you tell other people in your social circle that something was awry? It doesn't seem like Howard Lutnick did that, but today, of course, he'll have an opportunity to more fully explain himself.
David, if you want proof that Democrats are going to keep Epstein in the headlines, you can take a look at Sherrod Brown's very first ad in the Ohio Senate race, released just a couple of days ago. Here's part of it.
Of all 535 members of Congress, who's taken the most money from associates of Jeffrey Epstein? John Husted, that's who.
So if you're a Republican in one of these tight, and in that case, I think unexpectedly toss-up races, how do you even handle that?
Yeah, this isn't a fight you want to have. I mean, there are a couple of things here, Chris. I mean, one, this is a story that cuts across party lines, as we saw last year with both parties coming together to force the passage of the Epstein Transparency Act and to get, as much information as the DOJ will apparently release out behind the curtain. And so it's not a bad message to prosecute. I still think overall, Sherrod Brown and other Democratic challengers are going to be in better shape focusing on affordability, which is our voters' number one concern of all political stripes. But this is a good way to politically push Republicans off balance and put them in a position where they may feel compelled to answer a lot of questions they don't feel like answering. So not a bad opening gambit. As a closing message, I think all candidates will be better off taking a look at the polling in their district or state, seeing what those top priorities are, and then hammering those above anything else.